Welcome to the River Valley Church podcast. We are a community of faith that is interested in practicing the way of Jesus together. Each week, you'll hear messages from our Sunday gatherings that are meant to help you follow Jesus in your everyday life.
Well, I'd like to start out this morning by reading our passage, which is going to be in John chapter 13. So if you have a Bible, I want to encourage you to go there with me to the Gospel of John, chapter 13. And if you don't have a Bible, well, you're out of luck. Just kidding. But we do use it a lot, and we do want to encourage you to bring a Bible. Or if you've got a phone, of course, an app will work as well. We will not have it up on the screen. There's a lot of text, so I want to just jump right into John 13. This is verse 1 through 17 this morning. It says, "Now before the feast of Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. And during supper, when the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands and that he had come from God, was going back to God. He rose from supper. He laid aside his outer garments and taking a towel, tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, 'Lord, do you wash my feet?' Jesus answered him, 'What I am doing you do not understand now, but afterward you will understand.' Peter said to him, 'You shall never wash my feet.' Jesus answered him, 'If I do not wash you, you have no share with me.' Simon Peter said to him, 'Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head.' Jesus said to him, 'The one who is bathed does not need to wash except for his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not every one of you.' For he knew who was to betray him. That was why he said, 'Not all of you are clean.' When he washed their feet and put on his outer garments and resumed his place, he said to them, 'Do you understand what I have done for you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example, that you also should just as I have done for you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them.'" Father, we thank you for your word. We ask that you would use this passage in John's gospel to illuminate the truth for us this morning, and that we would see a little bit more of a glimpse of who you are in our pursuit of practicing the way of Jesus together. We pray in your name. Amen. I want to ask you a question to get started this morning. And it's sort of a scenario, so I want you to oblige me, and we're going to play a little game. Which is harder for you? Helping someone move or asking someone to help you move? Think about it. Which is harder for you? Giving someone a ride to the airport or asking someone to give you a ride to the airport? Which is harder for you? You know, when it's colder here in New England and that white stuff, I don't even want to name it, begins to fly and it piles up in our driveway. Which is harder for you? Volunteering to shovel your neighbor's driveway? Or if you're going on vacation, asking someone to help you out to shovel your driveway? Which is harder for you? Which is harder for you? Giving someone advice or being willing to receive someone's advice about something in your life? Which is harder for you? I want to say that I think that for most of us here today, the idea of giving these things is probably much easier than receiving these things. We, for many reasons, especially here in New England, I would say, we like to be the ones in our independence and our, kind of even at times isolation. We like to be the ones who are the ones to give the answers, to have the resources or to have the ability to help other people. Receiving, however, requires us to admit something that I think sometimes we would rather avoid, and that is that we, at a certain point in time, will come to see that we actually have needs ourselves. No matter how independent you are, no matter how self-starting you are, no matter how on your own you think you are, you have a need today. Throughout the series that we're in, The Art of Neighboring, we've been talking about just a very simple concept, but such a huge idea of learning our neighbors' names, to know who they are, the people in the closest proximity to us. We've been encouraged to make time and provide space and margin in our lives so that we would have the ability to even love our neighbors, as Jesus says. We've also looked at multiple different ways of opportunities to serve those closest to us. And those things all matter. But if we're not careful, what can happen is we can begin to think of neighboring as just a way of helping someone else, like on our own. We can think about it just as a way of becoming someone else's helper, someone that might live near us or close to us. And that's not necessarily a bad thing unless it outweighs the other side of the coin. And the problem here is that healthy relationships, as we begin to look at this, we realize that healthy relationships aren't built on one-way generosity. Healthy relationships and friendships are built upon a mutual love, trust, and dependence with people who both give and receive. This is what it means to be an authentic neighbor. Today, I want to talk about the art of receiving. We've been talking about the art of neighboring, but I want to flip the script a little bit right now and talk about the art of receiving. And using John's gospel, our text this morning, I think we begin to see something pretty interesting in this passage. Now, normally, when we look at a passage like this where Jesus washes his disciples' feet, many of us are probably familiar with this famous passage in John's gospel. But when we think about this moment, I think one of the things that we first think about is this thing called servant leadership. Servant leadership, and rightly so. Here's why. Jesus washes his disciples' feet, and then he tells them to go and do likewise. So I think right from there, we think to ourselves, okay, I've got my marching orders. I now have a little bit more, a glimpse of Jesus' heart for the people around me. I need to figure out what that means in my life to go and wash my neighbor's feet. to go and do what Jesus did to serve other people. And I think that is very apparent, but I think one of the things that's not so apparent, and the part that we often overlook, especially in this passage, is before Jesus tells Peter to go and to wash someone else's feet, he is told that Jesus must wash his feet first. Jesus must wash Peter's feet first. And Peter is uncomfortable. In fact, you hear it in his tone when he says, and I just picture Peter as Jesus is getting ready to get down on all fours. It says he took out his outer garment off. He's getting ready to wash their feet. And this job, so you know, was reserved for the lowest of low in the household. And Peter sees Jesus getting ready to wash his feet. And it's almost as if you can hear it in the tone of his voice. And he says, survey said, Lord, do you wash my feet? And then when he realizes Jesus is really doing this, he says, you shall never wash my feet. This was like shocking to him. Shocking that Jesus, his rabbi, his master, the guy that had the smarts among them, he'd spent his whole life in rabbinical school, and he knew the Old Testament law, and he was teaching these guys. He invited these guys to come and follow him. And here he is, getting ready to wash their feet. Well, Peter felt really uncomfortable to the point where he tried to stop Jesus. He tried to tell him, no, you'll never wash my feet. Until Jesus answered back to him and said, if I do not wash you, Peter, you shall have no share with me. In other words, before Peter could even serve Jesus, he first had to allow Jesus to serve him. Andrew Murray once wrote, "Humility is the place of entire dependence upon God." And I think that's exactly what Peter was resisting here. See, most of us don't mind helping others. We don't mind serving others. I know a great number of people, many of you in this room, that I just know will give the shirt off your back for somebody. People in my life that have really impacted my life by that example. Being willing to help, especially when someone's in need. But most of us have a really hard time, maybe some of us even in that position, allowing someone else to help us, because what we can do in helping someone else allows us to remain in control. Many times. Receiving is different, because receiving requires some level of vulnerability, and we don't like that. C.S. Lewis once observed, to love at all is to be vulnerable. To love at all is to be vulnerable. It's vulnerable to ask for prayer. It's vulnerable to admit that you're struggling. It's vulnerable to accept a meal after surgery, or if you've had a baby. You know, one of the things I love about our church is that you guys rally together. We do these meal trains for people who are in need as the needs arise. And we get to serve in that way. Do you know that the people on the other end of that had to somehow be vulnerable? And I know this because oftentimes we're working with them to get details of when can we drop the meals off? When, do you have any allergies? All of these things that we have to pre-talk about. There's some level of someone receiving what it is our community has to give them where they become vulnerable. It's vulnerable to let someone know when you don't have everything in control. It's vulnerable to reach out to a friend or somebody in our community and to be honest with them and say, I'm not okay. I need you to lift my arms up, or I need prayer. Sometimes, I think many times, our pride has a way of hiding behind phrases like, I'm fine. I've got it. It's okay. I don't want to inconvenience anybody. I don't want to make people feel like I'm a burden. But I think what happens is what looks like humility in some cases is actually just pride dressed up as independence. And I think it's actually a hindrance to what it means to be a neighbor. Because when we think about being a neighbor, we can't just think about what it is that I have to give someone else, but it actually involves what someone else has to give you. That's what it looks like to be a neighbor. Did you know that the gospel of Jesus Christ begins with receiving? Jesus' words to Peter point us beyond dirty feet, and they show us the gospel itself. Notice what Jesus does not say in this passage in John's gospel. He doesn't say, Peter, unless you serve me. He says, unless I wash you. Unless I wash you, you will have no part with me. Christianity, at the most basic fundamental building block, does not begin with what you or I do for God. It begins with what Christ has done for us. We don't earn forgiveness, we receive forgiveness. We don't achieve salvation, we receive salvation. We don't make ourselves clean because Jesus washes us. Friends, it took me 22 years to peel back a layer of the onion. I actually call it the gospel onion, because we're always learning something new about salvation and God's free gift to us. And I feel like grace is one of those things that is so counterintuitive that we have a hard time. And I know I did, and I grew up in the church. Not only understanding it, but receiving it. There's some part of us that thinks, I love what Jesus did for us on a cross. I love the whole idea that he went to a cross. He was my Savior. He became my Lord. There's something I couldn't do. But I think sometimes we live as if it's the cross plus my effort and my good deeds that somehow adds to Jesus' finished work on the cross. In other words, Jesus' work on the cross as we live that way is not actually finished, because we think something hangs upon us. Now, I want you to walk this fine line with me for a second, because again, I had to untangle and unravel and unlearn some things that I feel like God has shown me over the years, especially starting as a sophomore in my undergrad year. I'll never forget reading a specific book and having some layer of the gospel onion peeled back for me in a way that changed my heart, changed my life, changed the trajectory of my path. Dallas Willard famously once wrote, "Grace is not opposed to effort, it is opposed to earning." Grace is not opposed to effort, it is opposed to earning. The Christian life certainly requires effort on our part. Following Jesus isn't just a passive activity that just happens. You do not become a spiritually mature follower of Jesus Christ, a disciple, simply by, kind of laying back and doing nothing. That doesn't happen in anything. If you're hoping to get physically fit, that does not happen by just sitting back, right? Eating potato chips, watching Netflix, and hoping that someday things will just come into place. That's just not how it works. That's also not how it works spiritually. You don't just become a mature Christian believer overnight by doing nothing passively. But here's the fine line, and this makes all the difference. Our relationship with Christ never begins by earning something from him or earning his favor. It begins by coming to Jesus with empty hands and recognizing and admitting that there's something that I need. There's something I don't have. I come to you with empty hands. Peter couldn't become the servant of Jesus that Jesus was calling him to become until he first admitted to Jesus that he had a great need. And the same is true for you and me. Maybe one of the reasons that we struggle to believe and receive from other people is because we spent our entire lives trying to prove that we're enough, that we've got it under control. In fact, if I were to let my guard down and even for a minute think or say that I needed someone else's help, well, that would look like immaturity on my part, because I spent my whole life trying to be independent. And it works against the gospel. This is part of the reason we have such a hard time receiving the grace of God, is because we have missed one part of it, a really big part, that the gospel comes through receiving. And one of the things that we do too is because we don't want to appear weak, right? If we accept someone's help, that kind of looks like we're weak a little bit. We don't want anybody thinking that we can't handle it ourselves. And maybe you've bought into even the anti-gospel, I would say, cultural lie that everything revolves around me as it is, and so I have to be the one that's independent and strong, and other people come to me to ask for help. The gospel of Jesus Christ completely dismantles the illusion that you have it all together, that you're strong, that you are independent, because each one of us gathered in this room today comes to the Lord, if we come at all, with empty hands. Nothing. Nothing to give, nothing to add. We only come with hands that are outstretched to receive this free gift that he has for us. Everyone needs his grace. If you have trouble receiving from others, you're going to find it difficult to truly receive from Jesus, because both require the same confession: I cannot do this on my own. I cannot do this on my own. Jesus, interestingly enough, practiced the art of receiving. I want to show you how. It's remarkable that Jesus, he didn't just only serve people. Certainly he did. He served people generously. But Jesus gives us a great example. He also allowed other people to serve him. Here are a few of those examples. I want you to think about his ministry for a second. Let's think about some of the stories. Jesus borrowed Peter's boat as a fisherman that he was, right? He borrowed Peter's boat to teach from it, the crowds. He stayed, Jesus did, in other people's homes. He accepted meals that were prepared by others for him. He rode into Jerusalem on a borrowed donkey. And if you were here for Easter, you'll remember that it wasn't even a full-grown donkey, it was a colt of a donkey. It's like a little donkey. He celebrated the Last Supper in a borrowed upper room. Luke tells us that there were women who financially supported Jesus' ministry. And on the way to the cross, even on the way to the cross, Jesus allowed Simon of Cyrene to carry his cross when he fell. Other people served Jesus, and that was part of the plan. That was part of the story. Jesus was modeling, even in these moments, what the gospel looks like. The creator of the universe willingly lived a life of dependence. The one who came to give everything for us also knew how to receive. You know, receiving is something that Jesus gave us as an example, but receiving also does something. Receiving builds community. And I want to just say personally, receiving builds our community. It builds our community. One of the greatest barriers, I believe, to neighboring isn't selfishness. It is self-sufficiency. In many ways, I think we've, as I said before, been taught that, maybe maturity means needing less and less from other people. However, I think the Bible paints a different picture. When Jesus, in Luke chapter 10, sent out 72 followers, he intentionally sent them out with very little. You can go back and read the story. They would have had to have depended upon the hospitality of strangers, and they would have had to rely on other people. Now, why did they do this? Why did Jesus set it up this way? Well, because Jesus wasn't simply sending them out to serve. He was sending them to also receive. Mission wasn't just about bringing something, it was also about accepting something. Dependence was created through relationship. Henry Nouwen once wrote, "The greatest gift that we have to offer one another is our authentic self." Authenticity means acknowledging our limitations. It means saying, I don't have it all together, in my life. Maybe things are in shambles right now, and there are very few people that know that. Maybe you're struggling right now in your marriage, and there's nobody that knows except for you and your spouse. Maybe you're struggling with a child that is just really difficult or wandering away or whatever it may be, and there's very few people that know, and so therefore there's very few people that can support. There's a million examples we could give, but here's what I want to say. When we push away the offer of help that we would maybe otherwise receive, I think what happens is we unintentionally communicate that I don't need you. That I don't need what it is that you have. But saying yes to community communicates something very different. It says, I trust you, I value you, and I'm willing to let you into my life because I don't have it all together, and I actually have a need. And I think this is how neighbors move from being neighbors to becoming friends. And I think this is how relationships become more authentic. There's some part of you, and you have like a vulnerability meter. There's some part of you that as your vulnerability meter begins to rise, I believe your relationships become enriched. They become stronger. You're willing to let people in to know the real you, not the public facade-faced version of you, but the real you. Peter thought following Jesus meant serving him. These guys were They're ready to follow Jesus at whatever he wanted them to do. They've left everything behind. They want to follow him. They want to become more like him. They are on this journey. But Jesus showed Peter that following him first meant that Peter had to allow himself to be served, allowed himself to be vulnerable. The gospel is always beginning with receiving what Jesus has for us. And so before we can ever go out and, wash someone else's feet, we have to recognize that Jesus commanded that he wash your feet first. Before we ever love our neighbors, God first loved us. Before we ever give, we have to receive. This is a real challenge. This is a real challenge to us today, because I really do believe, myself included, that we struggle with this. And I think because we struggle with this, it will be a barrier to the gospel message itself in our life. Imagine what our neighborhoods would look like if Christians stopped trying to project some image of self-sufficiency, independence, and instead began to model gospel-shaped humility. That was willing to say, you know what? I need someone's help. I can't do everything on my own. Maybe I'll even intentionally put that in there so that I can begin to model what it looks like to be dependent upon my community. Imagine neighbors who were willing to admit that they needed prayer. People that felt so comfortable in their relationship with you as it grew that they felt like they could bring one of their hardships to you. I've had that happen a couple times in my life. I'll never forget when in Pennsylvania, when Danielle and I were still living there, our neighbor to the right of us, he began to start talking about all the issues and problems in his family. Just started opening up one day, and his name was Tony. He ran a pizza place. He was very Italian. And we would, go to his place at times. And as we began to build this friendship and relationship with Tony next to us over the years, I'll never forget it. One day, Danielle and I were both outside and, pre-kids, and we were just like in a whole other season of life. And Tony came over, and we were sitting there talking on the lawn, and he starts talking about his children and the disconnect that he had with his kids and the hard relationship that he was trying to work hard to regain back, like the trust of his children. Really hard, his children are grown and going their separate ways and really difficult. And I'll never forget, it was like a moment of just like relational equity, I would say, where we felt comfortable enough to ask Tony if we could pray for him in that moment, because he was just desperate, as we began to pray for Tony, tears streaming down his face and asking the God that he didn't quite even really know yet to come and make himself real to Tony and to bring back together what had been broken in their family. And we never, ever would have gotten to a place where we could have done that or felt comfortable doing that, or he with us, if we weren't willing to, in the little small moments of just being good neighbors, to just let our guard down for Tony and for Tony to let his guard down with us. This week, maybe your and my assignment isn't finding one more person to find who we can help out or serve, but maybe our assignment for this week is simply accepting someone's invitation. Maybe it's asking someone for their advice about something. Maybe it's borrowing a ladder. Maybe it's not buying that tool that you really want, but your neighbor has one, and you could just get it from them. And maybe even intentionally, it could be a way of striking up a conversation or building a relationship. Maybe it's allowing someone to bring you a meal. Maybe it's simply saying to that friend or that person, thank you, instead of, you don't really have to, or I'll get you back next time. Every time we receive something with humility, we remind ourselves of the gospel, that we were never meant to save ourselves. We were never meant to carry life on our own. We're never meant to try to get better at being more dependent in ourselves. We were created to live in dependency, first upon Christ, then upon one another, and that even includes our community here gathered. And the beautiful irony of the Christian life is this: the strongest people are not those who never need someone else. The strongest people are those who humble themselves enough to receive what God has provided through the hands of other people. May we, River Valley Church, become the kind of neighbors who are eager to serve, grateful to receive, and willing to let God build genuine community in and through us.
We're so glad you tuned in today. To learn more about River Valley Church, head over to rivervalleychurch.com, where we'd love to help you take some next steps.